Hello everybody and welcome back. On this week's episode, I want to show you how I make my ice and snow landscape terrain. As usual, there are already written tutorials on my website, miniaturemarauder.com, but I've begun creating video tutorials to reach more of you that prefer to watch the videos of how the content's created. Now, following some of my previous episodes, I'm going to do this in stages and show you what it looks like from foam to finish. So, starting out in the basics, as usual, we're going to be using some foam that I've already cut down into a small size because all of these pieces are going to be sample pieces that I've reproduced. There are larger pieces of foam that you can get out there. Lowe's has some here in the States that is big and blue, and it's about twice as thick. I actually have some of that here that I'll show you as well, but for the purpose of this, it's all the same process. I'm going to show you through the foam method. So starting out with your foam, you're then going to cut it. I actually have done a few different methods this time just for this particular phase. The way I typically cut them is with a Proxen hot wire cutter, and I cut them on an angle because I like them to have this kind of beveled edge on the sides. However, there's a few other ways that you can cut it. You can cut them with a hot wire, non-Proxen table, like it's just a regular hot wire cutter, and you can cut around the edges. It also looks really good. You can do this with the Proxen table too, and it just gives it a very straight, sheer edge on the sides. The other way to do it is if you don't have either of those tools, you can do it with just a regular blade, which is what I did here. And for just some random chip away, I cut it with the blade a little bit so that it would give it this kind of sheer face edge. When it's all painted up, it'll look more like a crumbling ice landscape. So you don't need a hot wire tool or a hot wire table to get this done, but your results will all look a little bit different depending on your preferred style and your method of cutting foam. Whatever works best for you is always the best, but try to be consistent if you're making a whole tabletop play set because you want your pieces to be relatively uniform in that set. So the next step, I do things a little bit differently, and I'm not sure I've seen anybody else out there do this. I don't know if it's because the way I do things is a little bit stupid, or if this is just a unique way of doing it that tends to work. So I actually take a torch and I burn these pieces. And so what I ended up doing, I purchased one of these kitchen torch for creme brulee and things like that, and they're like 20 bucks or so. I'll make sure I put a link in the description below if you could find one. And you fill them up with butane, and they just, well, if I can get it to light, there we go. And you just basically take it and you burn small little bits to flatten it out. If you've ever taken a look at pictures of icebergs and glacial drift, they all have these wind-worn bits of wear away that's very nice and smooth. So I wanted to kind of replicate that, and I found that using a torch or a lighter is probably the best way to do it. I tried using my fingers to indent, but the problem is the compression of this foam will pop it back out steadily, and then you won't get as clean of a look as you want. You don't have to burn this very hard. You just kind of spritz over the surface, and it will leave these marks. A note of caution on this, of course, you are burning foam. You don't want to do this indoors, and you don't want to do it if you don't have a breathing apparatus, a respirator of some kind. One particularly that works with fumes. So you can get them pretty cheap from companies like 3M. Again, I'll try to make sure I have links of everything in the descriptions down below. But if you do it inside, make sure it's an area that's not going to be occupied for a little bit, that you're wearing proper protection, and you can do this in about 20 seconds. Burn it in a couple little spots and get these little wavy patterns, and you're done. Following suit with our next step, you're going to use Mod Podge again. And as I show in all my other previous videos, I use black paint mixed with Mod Podge. It doesn't really matter if it's gloss or matte. The results, in my experience, have been the same. But you can buy it in a big bucket, put in your black paint, mix it all up until it's actually black and not gray, and then you can brush over. So something I've also been experimenting with is using more of those sponge brushes instead of using a regular cheap brush. Now, the cheap brushes work, but the problem is the bristles come out, and I'm sure on some of these pieces here, I think I did this one with the foam, but on a couple other pieces, I had random stray hairs from the brushes getting mixed in, which makes an ugly eyesore on your pieces. Because these are test pieces that I'm doing just to show you, it doesn't really matter that much for me, but for your pieces on your tabletop, it'll probably drive you nuts. So you can buy, for about the same price, those little black foam brushes, and I find you actually get smoother coverage when it's all said and done. So moving on to the priming stage, this is what my piece looks like once I've primed it, right? And I don't bother doing the bottom sides unless this is a dual-sided piece because it's going to go flat down on the table. Doesn't really matter. But what I've done here is I actually prefer to do a 2-stage primer. In this instance, what I did is I took Army Paint Spray Crystal Blue and Corax White from Citadel. You can really use any that work for you. These two colors have been proven to be reliable for making consistency with my pieces, but you put on the blue first. This is the first level of primer you're going to put on, and then after you do a spotty job of putting on the white, but then focus it more on the tops and just spray a little extra wherever you need to. This is going to give you a nicer undertone of that blue and make it look a little bit more like ice typically looks when the sunlight is hitting it. So once this stage is all done, you can go on to the airbrush stage. You don't have to have an airbrush for this. You can just use really thin paints and a brush. I use an airbrush because I like the way the effect comes out better. So this piece is representing 2 particular phases. One, I took a couple different colors of lighter blues, aquas, whatever I had on hand. This particular test piece doesn't 100% match the piece I made because I ran out of the more aquamarine turquoise color, but I mixed a little bit and tried to do it a little differently this time. So you just want to, in all of the divots that you've ended up burning, you want to spray and make it a little darker in one spot and then fade out the color as it gets to the outside. And you want to do this all along the edges as well. It just makes it look a lot more like you're getting off of the surface layer of the ice and down to the actual shiny, wet parts of the ice. To add on to that wet feature, so I did one color and then I did a slightly darker color as I kind of fanned out. You can do it in one stage if you like. I find 2 colors at a minimum gives you a nice representation of that color change when it's hit by sunlight. To give it the wet look, I added some gloss varnish to the mix. You can use any gloss varnish. I think for this piece, I used the Vallejo gloss varnish. On the last couple, I used a mixture of Vallejo and Ardcoat. It does consume quite a lot if you're doing a lot of pieces. My recommendation to you would be to buy the cheap stuff online in a big old bottle of it, and it'll be much easier to save money building these pieces. So this is what my final piece came out to, and it looks pretty good. I mean, it's nice, it's shiny, it's a simple piece that I can use as scatter terrain. As you can see, I've got my snow and ice mat down here. It matches it pretty well. My final product, however, once this part's done, you want to do some dry brushing on it, and you can be super, super aggressive when you do this dry brush, and it just adds a lot more texture. It adds more white to it. I didn't add any actual snow effect to this piece, or most of these pieces, but you can add that as well if you like. And to show you one of the last big pieces that I have here, this is a big guy. So this is a bigger piece, and it is a thicker foam, as you can see on the sides, but this is a much thicker piece that I produced to be a bigger landscape floating ice block for my players. I used a slightly different color on this one, and personally, this is just my personal preference. You can use whatever blue color you want. I like more of a greenish aqua color. It looks more like realistic ice. You can still do dark colors around the edges. That looks good too. But the aqua greenish blue color, it just looks really, really good, especially after you give it an aggressive dry brushing. It's going to mix very well with the white. So all said and done, this is a very easy project for anyone to undertake. Again, whether or not you have a Proxen hot wire cutter or any of those other fancier tools, if you're going to be making a lot of foam pieces, I highly recommend picking up one of those tools, but you don't need it. You can still go back and do things the old blade style, and you'll still end up with a really cool looking piece when it's all done. I would, again, of course, stress making some more oblong shapes. You don't want your uniforms to be as boxy as like this piece was. I just chipped it up real quick, but you want to cut things down, make them little off in size and shape. And then, of course, use your torch, get the ice effect to it, and you'll be on your way to making some really stellar ice terrain pieces. As always, you can check out miniaturemarauder.com and see some of the other works that are in process, and I'll be producing more videos on a weekly basis and linking them up to that particular blog. I want to thank you guys again for taking the time to check out my video. Hopefully you found this informative and there's something in here you can take back to your own tabletop crafting style. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments down below. I'd be happy to answer them. And as usual, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this out. I do try to create content on a weekly basis, so there'll be some fresh stuff coming up just around the corner. Thanks again, guys, and we'll see you next time.